just waiting for your title. So I can introduce you.
Here.
Risk Ahead is the name of this talk.
No, it's not. That's just the picture.
I need to get my glasses to read the rest
Sorry.
of it. So I hope you all have had a wonderful spring break and are well rested, so we can pay attention during this talk. This talk whose name is Risk Ahead, Risk Literacy and Information Search, using educational materials in medical decision making. We're getting close.
Yeah, it should be.
Just has to download a new version of PowerPoint.
office.
Yeah.
This is his number that nobody interrupts him. Every week.
No, it's doing this. Is it trying to use the smart board?
Probably.
I don't want it to. I don't need it to.
It's loading add-ins,
Yeah.
I don't have any.
but PowerPoint does.
Okay. Well, I guess I could start talking if you want me to. I have my slides right here. Oh, okay, we got a percentage bar. We're going. We're getting close.
It's lying.
Yeah, sometimes it's lying.
Sometimes it lies.
Percentages, whatever.
Says the human back I should listen to you.
Process.
I love how those numbers are always
We
the
learn
same
about
thing.
that.
Yeah.
Percentage and percentage.
Right?
And then it goes to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my talk today is risk literacy and information search, using educational materials for medical decision making. So in 2006, the CDC recommended that all individuals get tested for HIV despite their risk group. In 2012, they approved this home HIV test, which is really good because we want to know who is HIV positive in the population. So this is a really good thing because it gives individuals privacy, right? So they can take this test home, they can do it in their own home, they don't have to see anyone else. But there is one downfall. Test results, there is a problem with test interpretation. So one of the problems is that the accuracy of these test results, so say I take a test, I get a result back, the accuracy of that result depends on my risk factors for that disease. So high risk groups for HIV are men who have sex with men, sex workers, individuals who use intravenous drugs, but the majority of the population is actually at very low risk for HIV. So this is just a graph demonstrating that the prevalence of HIV depends on your risk group. What's prevalence? Prevalence is the amount of individuals living in a certain area with a disease or disorder. For HIV, the prevalence of this disease depends heavily on your risk group, and it changes. So this is just the amount of heterosexuals. You can see that more females than males in heterosexuals, but the highest risk group is for homosexuals, specifically men who have sex with men. So we can calculate the prevalence of a particular risk group. So how likely is it that an individual will have HIV given the information you know about them? So if we calculate the prevalence for 14 to 24-year-olds in the US, we actually see that 965 out of 1 million, or roughly about 1 out of 1,000 individuals will have HIV. So what does this mean for HIV testing then? Well, the accuracy depends on the prevalence depends on risk. So specifically, the proportion of positive test results that are actually true positives depends on which risk group or what the prevalence of HIV is for you specifically. So the PPV is the main measure in my research. This is the likelihood that a positive test result will be a true positive in a certain risk group. So here's a graph just demonstrating risk. So from 0 risk to all the way 100% risk for HIV, and then I've mapped on the positive predictive value. So at a certain point, it looks like it's pretty accurate. But let's zoom in on this part right here. So right now the scale is up to 1. I cut it dramatically, right? So what this part of this graph is showing is that as risk increases, the accuracy of that test result also increases. So let's map on those young adults, that one risk group. So with PowerPoint, I wasn't able to get the exact numerical value, but this is pretty close. So what this is saying is for a risk of 0.009, that the positive predictive value of an HIV test, the home HIV test, would be 0.3. So 30%, I'll get into it a little bit. Okay, so we can calculate the exact PPV. So we have the prevalence that we calculated from the HIV home test brochure that they give with the test. They say the sensitivity and specificity are those two numbers. Using Bayesian reasoning, we can calculate the exact positive predictive value. So for this test, for this risk group, the positive predictive value is 32%. That means 32% of positive test results are true positives, where about roughly 68% of those positive test results will be false positives. Yeah. So the accuracy of the test for this risk group for this disease isn't all that great. So PPV, this statistic is really, really hard for people to interpret. PPV is a conditional risk, which means it depends on that positive test result. So your risk for having HIV is different than your risk of having HIV after receiving a positive test result. It depends on this positive test result. Previous research, including my own, has found that counselors are not really good at understanding the statistic, and they're not able to communicate it to others. They confuse the positive predictive value with overall test sensitivity, the ability of a test to accurately identify positive individuals in a population. And some of them actually deny that false positives can even happen. So they say that either they can be eliminated through repeated testing, they happened in the past, they don't happen any longer, or they happen in foreign countries, but they don't happen here. So one thing that can predict performance on a lot of things is numeracy. It's very good at predicting use of numerical information and conditional risk, which is PPV. PPV is this conditional risk. But however, when we give individuals scenario-based tasks on this, we only get 9 to 30% depending on certain manipulations. But we're not able to get the majority of individuals to understand. And currently there's very limited research on how to use the educational materials that are given with these tests and how they're interpreted by users. So the goal of my research was to investigate the ability of college students to be able to use the brochure given with the home HIV test. I predicted that they weren't going to do that great, and even numeracy would help a little bit, but not much. And this is based upon past research that has showed that conditional risk can be helped by numeracy skills. So I had 33 participants in my developmental psychology class participate in this for extra credit. They were given the option of an alternative assignment. But basically, they were given the home HIV test brochure. This is a 19-page document in which it talks about how to test and then also the statistics about testing in user studies. Then they were directed to riskliteracy.org to complete the Berlin numeracy test. Take a picture of that. And they were given this, what I call the Sarah scenario. So this scenario I've used in my master's research and I'm currently using for my new research line. Basically, it talks about this girl, Sarah. She's thinking about getting pregnant. She wants to get an HIV test to know what her status is before she gets pregnant. And basically, what she wants to know is the PPV. So it gets the students connected to this person and asks about someone else other than themselves. So then they're asked some diagnostic interpretation questions and some other things. they're given informed consent. They downloaded these materials, which included the home brochure and the answer booklet, which had all these instructions and the questions for them. And then I asked them to highlight the brochure. So I had them go through answer questions. And if they used a piece of information from the brochure, I asked them to highlight it and number which question they used to answer it. So I could kind of see where they were looking to get this information. And so what I asked them is, which measure is the ability to accurately identify individuals with or without the disease? And in a multiple choice format, majority of individuals were able to accurately distinguish between sensitivity and specificity. But I asked them to report the exact numerical value, and this could be found in the HIV brochure. Only 70% and 85% respectively were able to pull that exact number out of the brochure. Now this is actually pretty accurate. Now when I switched, majority of them were inaccurate at reporting the false negative and false positive rate. False negative and false positive rate are just the inverse of the sensitivity and specificity. So all they have to do is take 1 minus the sensitivity and 1 minus the specificity to get these numbers. And accuracy was really, really low.
Kat, did you define what false positive and false negative were for them?
In this one, I did. It was in the Sarah scenario.
Okay.
She said that sometimes there's false positive, sometimes there's false negative. So it was talked about a little bit.
But it said a false positive is when the test result says you have HIV when in fact you don't.
Right.
Okay.
And so in the actual materials, in the brochure, I'll show you where they actually pulled that out. It's on my last slide.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I asked them to report the PPV. So with our calculation for young adults, we know it's about 30%. Well, we had one person say around 80, 160, a little spread out, but the majority of individuals responded that the positive predictive value is about 99%, confusing it again with sensitivity and specificity, right? So then I wanted to see if this interacted with numeracy at all. And what I found is that it doesn't. It doesn't matter if you're high numerate or low numerate. The only thing it really affects is confidence. So high numerates were more overconfident that they knew the PPV, but were no more accurate in reporting it. So what this is our high numeracy and this is low numeracy, and up here we have proportion correct. So you can see that 95% for the multiple choice, it drastically changes when we ask for exact values. We get almost no response for the exact values down here. And then down here I asked them Likert scale questions, so I wanted to get estimate. Do they understand that it's about 30%? And really they were saying that on a scale of 1 to 6, with 1 being very, very low probability and 6 being a very high probability, that about 5 or 5.3, they were saying that it is very highly probable that if I get a positive test result that I do have HIV, which is counterintuitive, but they were in the opposite direction for that. So we only found significant differences in the confidence, and then we did find a difference in false negative, but it wasn't, looks to be more of a standard deviation issue. All right, so what I found is that numeracy was related to confidence. Those with high numeracy were more confident in both their estimation of the PPV and the calculation of the PPV. But ironically, they were no more accurate. So they had this overconfidence. For information search, I looked at the highlights of all the, from all the brochures, and I wanted to make sure that each of the highlights could actually be used to answer the questions that they were claiming they were. And I went through and I judged that basically every question that they said they could find the information in, they could, so no one was just reporting random numbers. And I did find that numeracy was significantly related to information search. People who were high in numeracy found more information for each question. So they were picking out more information to use in their calculations. And so you can see that about average of 15 highlights versus 7 for differences.
Is that overall highlights or?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's for overall highlights. So what I found out is numeracy really doesn't help with the understanding of the PPV, but it does help with information search, which is beneficial because it can help with long-term understanding, retention of this information. I did find that participants were overconfident and that they thought they knew what the PPV was, but they didn't report the accurate results. So my future directions, I want to improve PPV understanding. So how I claim to do that is, in the brochure, they didn't talk about the prevalence at all. So I'm wondering if that missing prevalence statistic had a lot to do with their ability to calculate the PPV. So I want to see if the prevalence statistics will actually influence that. But further than that, I want to show graphical representation. So this is what they got from the brochure. This is directly out of the home HIV brochure. And the majority of participants in this past study used these materials to answer questions about sensitivity and specificity. The sensitivity is right here, really, really small. Specificity is here, really, really small. But what I want to do is highlight this information in terms of risk groups. So this is the graphical representation, the icon array that I have created to help people understand about their risk. So it says 2 out of 1,000 people tested will have false positive test results. 1 out of 1,000 people will have true positive test results. And then the rest of the 1,000 people will have a true negative test result. And I just found a mistake on that. It's good I haven't launched the study yet. So that's supposed to be 997. But yeah, so that's what I want to do with this. So is there any questions? Yeah.
Would you go
Sure.
back to the last slide?
Sure.
So, I'm still confused. Did people know what sensitivity and specificity were? Or could they just go to that table and see that the title said specificity and find the number?
I changed these titles actually, so they didn't say sensitivity and specificity on them, but they do say like the sensitivity of the test is.
So did you
whatever.
include any measures of their understanding of those concepts?
I did the multiple choice question, so
Okay.
if I go back to this first graph, I asked the multiple choice question, so which measures the ability of a test to accurately identify individuals with or without HIV? And then I gave them the option of sensitivity, specificity, window period, and prevalence for the 4 terms. So it was a 4 alternative force choice
Thanks.
measure. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Could you walk me through one more time the overconfidence bit for the high B and tiers?
Yeah.
So how did that go?
So basically, I asked them after they did a Likert estimate of the PPV and then a calculation of the PPV, how confident were you in your estimation or your calculation of PPV? And what I found is that high numerates were more confident than low numerates, unjustified, because there was no difference, where is it, in their ability to report it. So they were more confident, however, they were no more accurate.
So are those zeros the fact that nobody reported anything?
Yeah, no, but, well, they reported stuff, but nothing
Okay.
was right. So this
Got
is proportion
I was
correct.
say, I'm confident that I don't know the answer.
Yeah. This is proportion correct, okay, is what that measure is, yeah. Is there any other questions? Sorry, I think Katie.
This information is all based on this home, or associated with this home test. Have you looked at, are there materials that are given out if you go to a doctor and have the test?
My understanding of that procedure is that you go to the doctors, you get a test result, and then they have a post-testing counseling session in which they explain your results to you. So what was the question?
I just wondered if there were materials.
Oh,
There
yeah,
are
and,
some.
and I think they do have like educational materials, some brochures and stuff like that.
But I don't think a lot of them have the PPV in them. So like,
No, and this one didn't have the PPV in it.
right, but I mean even like if you go to a testing center and you get a test, they just give you like the general stuff of the sensitivity
Give you
and
the
spec.
specificity, yeah, they won't give you any specifics to your risk group. And
Right.
a lot of the reason that they don't include this information is it does change from risk group to risk group.
Which would be simple to make interactive. Yeah.
We see the histogram on the previous
Sure.
page, I think it is. So the folks who were giving the more or less accurate, or at least the really low reported PPVs, do you have any sense of whether or not they were just distrustful of the test results in general, or whether or not they were actually trying to apply some kind of Bayesian formula?
You know, these were undergraduate students, so I don't have a whole lot of faith in them, and I think that those were more errors than anything else, that they misinterpreted the question or something like that. But I did see some evidence of them trying to calculate because these were handwritten.
Oh, yeah.
But my idea is that they had no hope of calculating the correct PPV because it was not included in the materials. Like, there was no reference class for prevalence for them to be able to calculate it. So unless they took this graph right here and looked at the number of true positives and false positives and true negatives and false negatives, because you can calculate the PPV from that as well, they could have done it with this. But then I dug in further, and these are two different samples. One are known to have HIV, and the other is a low-risk category, and you can't really compare those. So this is just bad data.
So basically, there's no way to get the right answer necessarily. You just sort of have to guesstimate.
Well, no, there is the way to get the right answer. So you can calculate prevalence for your risk group, and then go through.
So that information was in there, the prevalence for the risk group?
No, it was not in there. It was not included in there.
Is it included though in the Sarah scenario?
No.
So then how are they supposed to calculate that?
Yeah.
I was just looking to see what they would report for
Well, how
it.
do you know they're wrong then?
How do I know they're wrong? I don't know they're wrong. I guess I don't. But I guess I was more looking to see what they would report for it, and I realized afterwards that they wouldn't be able to calculate because there was no prevalence statistic. I thought maybe they could from those graphs or whatever, but then I realized that that was bad data too. So I guess the point of the moral of the story is these brochures are not giving the right information to answer the types of questions that I would hope would be able to be answered by the brochure.
Or that you want to be answered by the
Right,
brochure
that you'd want
if
to
you're
be
getting a positive test result.
Right, so if people are, at home and they're taking the test and they get a positive test result, there is a high chance that if they're low risk for that disease, that it'll be a false positive test result. When they're at the doctor's office, they're more likely to actually have a retest so that that false positive can be discovered. But when they're at home, there are reports of people going into deep depression, spending all their money, divorcing their spouses, and committing suicide. So basically,
Without a verified
test, because they don't understand these test results, right? And they're too scared to go to their doctor, right?
That's why they took it at home.
Right.
That's why they took it at home to begin with.
So what do the instructions tell them? If you test positive, call this number and we'll discuss it with you? I mean, what
I think
overall?
that's what the end of the message is in the brochure. And so what I did is I called, in my first study when I was doing my master's research, I called a whole bunch of these counseling places and asked them these questions, and they were unable to answer my questions. So basically what these counseling places are for is to give more resources for treatment. And recently there have been a lot of advances in HIV research, and they're getting really, really close to a cure. So we want to find all these people that have HIV, so that they can get tested. But the downfall is this testing.
So you defined PPV for them,
Yes,
but then they didn't actually have the numbers to calculate it.
right, correct. So what I guess more than the PPV, I was focusing on what information they could get out of there. That was kind of more the point. What information can they get out of this brochure? And what information can I then give them so they'll be able to understand more? So this is just a first step in a whole line of studies that I'm doing. So the next step is I'm giving them the prevalence with the educational materials to see if they can actually calculate it, even if the prevalence number was in there. And my guess is that even with the prevalence information, they're not going to be able to calculate it.
But maybe that interacts with numeracy.
But maybe that interacts
Now they at
with
least have the information.
Right.
Right.
Because like not interacting, of course, it seems like it wouldn't interact with numeracy because it doesn't matter how.
The numbers aren't there.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right, so the next step was adding that prevalence statistic in to see if it did anything with it. But this was more like, what information do they use to answer these questions?
So what's your long-term goal with this? I mean, once you understand how people interpret this information, how do you have a plan to improve it, or?
Well, I want to see what the simplest addition to these brochures would be to increase PPV understanding more.
Were you-
So my goal is to just basically suggest guidelines for brochure information, because basically when you get a brochure, it's like, if it's positive, you're most likely positive. I don't know how many brochures on HIV I have up in my office right now that say, if you have HIV, you have HIV. If you get a positive test result, you have it. Come see us.
So were you here when Dr. Garcia Romero gave her presentation? Because she probably has some good ideas of what.
And
simple
I have been
additions-
working closely with her
Okay,
to
okay.
develop the
Icon
visual aid.
Yeah, you got it, yeah.
So,
Is this
So, but at the end of the day, positive test result or not, even if they know that there's a higher error rate by
Right.
knowing PPV,
mhm.
if they get a positive result, is that still gonna make them call to verify or do something to verify? Is that gonna change their behavior of divorcing their husband and killing themselves?
Right, so what we're trying to do is
Okay.
we're developing this measure for a trust and test measure, basically. So what we're trying to see is if we give people this information, are they gonna trust that test result? And if they don't trust that test result, we know that we're getting close.
But then do you really want them not to trust it?
Yeah, because I want them to get retested. If they're that low risk group, if they're high risk.
But how do you know that
I think
Not
the
trusting it
easiest
is
thing
gonna
would
get
be to
them-
do is
retested?
if you receive a positive test result, go to this website and have them input their risk group, and then it would give them a next course of action. If they're in a high risk group, well, anyone should get retested. Is the
Right, but
normal
they're-
next step.
So my question is, they're not getting retested now, so if you tell them, if they don't have confidence in it because there's a higher error rate, would they be more inclined to say, oh, the test must be wrong? And
Right,
still
I'm not
get
saying
tested?
that. I don't care if they're like it or not, but if you can get them to go online, get some more information, they're more likely to retest.
Right.
Cause
I guess my point being though, if you truly would suspect lower confidence in the test, I'm not so sure that's a good outcome either.
right. Right,
It's
that's,
not the test, it's the test result itself. So if it's a positive test result, we want them to be a little
But I don't know that
wary
people-
about it being.
Yeah, I don't know if people are gonna be able to
If you're
differentiate
comparing,
that.
if
Well,
you're
if you
comparing
think
which
about
test
a
to
pregnancy test, and I've taken these before,
buy.
I had a false positive my first time, or no, a false negative my first time, and I didn't get retested. And then 2-3 months later, yeah, I was pregnant. So maybe if I hadn't trusted that test as much, I would have gotten retested a little bit sooner and would have had a couple more options. I don't know. So I'm trying to get people to retest themselves because.
Yeah, but point
They-
being, if they have lower confidence, I'm not so sure that's gonna force them to retest.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
guess that's my thought.
Or retest with a different test, because the home HIV test, it has like 99.9%.
I guess I would just question, I think lowering their confidence is A, gonna make them not test to begin with, or not retest, rather than doing what you want them to do.
Right, so test.
why don't they
outcomes.
just sell the test in a twofer deal? So you test them, you basically have a test and a retest
Yeah.
all in one. So it actually would be the benefit of these.
Yeah.
If you just do it once, you send in 2 samples, they're gonna get tested twice. So you have 2 results. Now what does that mean for you though?
Right.
Is what the next step would be. Is which one do you trust?
What we're
You
trying
get-
to do is get them to go to their doctor. to
Yeah.
And then you've got 997 out of every 1,000 people who just get by with one because it's a
Right,
correct.
Yeah.
rate to-
So
Correct
false
detection.
positives don't happen that often, but if it's a positive test result and you're low risk, there's that likelihood.
So I'm thinking about this 2-pack thing.
They sell pregnancy tests in
now let's say I'm
2-packs.
in the low.
Hey,
Let's say I'm in the low risk group,
Right.
and I get a false positive,
Mhm.
and I take another one. Is it still? If I get 2 positives, I mean, there's
There's
still
some
a
additive
probability.
risk
right.
to
There's
that,
probably
yeah.
still a probability that
Right,
I'm
there's still,
negative.
yeah,
low risk
it
is
depends
still
on
pretty high.
if, it depends on what the error is. If you do the test twice and you make the same error twice,
Well,
Yeah.
and is the error a user error, or is the error a chemistry error that if you test positive once, you're gonna test positive twice regardless?
Just
That- I
I
mean,
mean, if it was a user error, it'd probably be closer to chance, because people would be messing it up constantly.
and these statistics that they reported in here were user statistics, so they had unexperienced users take the test. And that's what they used. So that's what the sensitivity and specificity are reflecting as unexperienced users.
Is this a private, like a company that distributes this, or is
Yes.
this? Okay.
There are a couple home HIV tests, but the one that I am working with is the OraSure.
Okay.
And it is an oral, plasma, or a blood test.
So do you think this 19-page document that people get,
Yeah.
Is that,
Are they gonna
is that
read it?
designed, like, as a company and you do research on your customers,
Mm-hmm.
why would you give people a 19-page doc? You know, do they not have the right people in place to design this brochure
the
to?
lawyers told them to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. It's an FDA
Yeah,
requirement.
there's
Like
certain
every
requirements.
medication you get that damn
included in
brochure.
that document are not just tables like this of statistics. I mean, there's a lot of statistics and tables, and it takes a while to actually find these two in the brochure. But the first half of it is how to test, with pictures and stuff like that, about how to do the different types of testing. So half of it's how to test, the other half is statistics about how accurate the tests are. But in all that accuracy, students weren't able to answer these simple questions about the test.
So does it turn into an ethical issue somehow?
Somehow, how?
I mean, like, you know, this 19-page document, and even the confidence that your customer, whoever gets this, is able to understand and comprehend what they're doing and the implications of it.
Right, so,
So it should actually, it could be an ethical issue, like from the top down. I mean, if the FDA thinks that, oh, this is all the information you need to understand how to use and understand your test results, then, yeah, that
And-
becomes.
and
yeah,
also, if-
basic minimal
If they give you this
requirement,
PPV, and you know that you're in the low risk group, do you go, oh, well, I don't need to buy this then? It's not even worth it?
Well,
Right.
that's,
So,
yeah, and so that's kind of the understanding that we want to get at is this whole relationship between PPV and risk. So if you're at really, 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 really low risk for something, and you get a positive test result, retest. That is the main message of my
Yeah.
research.
Why would it almost seems like you're concentrating on the wrong thing. So
Okay.
Yeah.
it seemed like the group you should be worried about are the people who have it and get a negative test.
right?
Well, see, there is, so the negative predictive value doesn't have the same problem that the positive predictive value does. The negative predictive value is actually more close to the 99%. So if you get a negative test result, it is almost 100% of the time that you actually do not have HIV. So false negatives are 1 out of a million, rather than 965 out of a million.
You might think the anyway.
But, and, I mean, everyone is focused on, getting these people that have HIV so that they can be treated. But it's more often that you don't have these false negatives. It's not as big of a problem. Because the threshold is set at a certain level, so it's where they'll capture all the people. False positives can occur, but false negatives, yeah.
so it seems to me like maybe you have like a, like you were saying, like a, calculate your risk group, right? So
And
low and high,
that's-
and if you're high, you get 2. You get the 2-pack. You know?
Right.
And if you're low, you take 1, and if it's negative, you're done. And if it's positive, you get the 2-pack.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I don't know, like
Something
that's
on
way
the
more accurate
advertising
than,
on the box or something.
yeah.
So, did they even talk about risk groups in the brochure? No, they don't even talk about risk groups.
No. And
Because
that,
they're trying to get everybody to be tested.
Tested.
Right.
Well,
So do we know what percent of the population, so if 100% of people that get tested
Mhm.
98% of them go to their doctor and test, and 2% use the home test. Are there any data showing the prevalence of how many people opt for the home test over a
I
clinic
haven't.
test?
The home test is only a couple years old, so I haven't really looked at those statistics yet. I haven't
So
seen
we don't know how many
people,
users per
users
se there
there
are.
actually are, how many people are buying home HIV tests. No, but my thinking is that, you know,
And whether there would be a bias going into it? Like,
right, who actually goes to their doctor versus who actually
right,
goes.
and I would suspect there's a bias, a selection bias based upon risk level to begin with,
Yep.
which
Yeah.
would contribute.
Right, so that's a good point. I know, right? That's all. So, any other questions?